Hello everyone, I'm Nellie Owens. I've been resting here in Forest Grove for 68 years next to my father and one of my brothers. My parents, William and Margaret, were Minnesota farmers. I was born in 1869 and my brother Willie was born when I was 12 years old, which made me upset because I had to help take care of him. About 1871, my father gave up farming and we moved to Alba, Minnesota, where my pa was a postmaster. Pa knew everyone in town and we lived in the back rooms of a general store. The business world seemed more appealing and exciting to my father rather than farming, so we moved to Walnut Grove, a sleepy town in southern Minnesota where my parents started their own mercantile business. My mother ran the store, and my father practiced veterinary medicine on the side. That was when I was 5 years old. In 1882, the Ingalls family moved to Walnut Grove. The Ingalls were farmers and they lived out of town. Laura and Mary had to walk several miles to the new two-story schoolhouse in Walnut Grove. Laura Ingalls was a year older than me. I thought she was a little different. Laura thought I had such wonderful toys and books. She really liked my copy of Mother Goose. One day after she looked at all my toys, Laura had the nerve to reach for one of my favorite dolls. I quickly jerked her back and said, "Don't you touch her!" Then I carefully wrapped her in soft paper and put her back in the box. Who knows what filth that farm girl would have gotten on my doll. Once Willie and I did go to visit the Ingalls, we all went wading in the creek. Laura led the way, and she crowded me over towards a rock. I looked under to see a huge, disgusting crawfish, with its big claws sticking out from underneath the rock. I ran screaming, splashing into the lower pool and out onto the bank. My feet and legs were covered with little, long, disgusting bloodsuckers. I looked over to see Laura rolling, laughing in the grass. I hated her. With crop failures and the loss of their baby boy, the Ingalls left Walnut Grove. They returned a few years later, though, at the Walnut Grove Village Council. Mr. Ingalls was elected Justice of the Peace, and my father was elected town treasurer. A nasty scarlet fever epidemic spread through town one spring, and Mary Ingalls was sadly left blind. On 4th of July, the very next year, my brother Willie was playing with some older boys, and he was injured in a firecracker accident. He lost his sight in one of his eyes, and the other had minor damage. Another unfortunate incident happened at the sawmill when I was 14. Frank Beetle's father was killed, and Mrs. Beetle was forced to work as a washerwoman, but she still could not support her large, young family. The children were farmed out with local settlers who could help her, and that's how I gained a new brother. My mother loved Frank, something fearsome, and he became part of our family. Pa decided to move west in 1884 when I was 15. Frank wanted to go to California with our family, so he asked his mother if he was old enough to make his own decisions in this matter, and yet his mother said he was old enough. So we all went to California. Frank Owens became forever after Frank Beetle.
So, after about 7 substantial years in California, my business-savvy father sold our general store for quite the profit. So we packed up our belongings and bumped our way to Tillamook, all the way through the wilderness up to Oregon. My brother Frank Beetle Owens even rode his pony bareback most of the way, guiding our wagon along the trail. My father, when we reached Tillamook, my father purchased 80 acres along the Trask River, just south of Tillamook, in an area called South Prairie. We built a cedar plank house and a barn there, and my father and brothers decided to raise dairy cattle. Father became the first veterinarian in the entire county, and I helped out by teaching financially by teaching at the small school in Bay City on the beach. Well, news came one day that Mr. Henry Kirry was coming to town from California. Our families had been acquainted while we lived in the area together, and so we already knew Henry and Walter. The two brothers were coming to Oregon to buy timberland and build a sawmill here. Unfortunately, on their way north, a storm came up and sank the boat that had all of their equipment on board right to the bottom of the ocean. Of course, his brother Walter decided to turn tail and run back to California, like the spineless kid I thought he was. And Henry decided to forge on alone to Tillamook. However, just as Henry finally found work, he was suddenly struck down with the typhoid epidemic. He experienced all the usual symptoms, fever and fatigue, red lesions all over his body, awful stomach pain. My family and I visited him during his long recuperation, and it would be imprudent of me to say that my strength gave him the will to survive, but he finally, fortunately, recovered and pursued work again. He was a great storyteller, and it was exciting to hear of his many hunting and fishing expeditions and the tales of all the different people he'd met along the way. Now, it wouldn't be ladylike for me to say that I was smitten by Henry, but I was impressed that he enjoyed cooking and that he could make himself a nice pair of trousers on a sewing machine. After some begging on his part, I must say, I agreed to marry Henry, and we were wed just before my 25th birthday. Some would say I was a little past my marrying prime at that age, but Henry would not hear such empty gossip. We moved to Bay City, the same town on the beach where I had been teaching school, and Henry decided to open up a blacksmith shop there. And eventually we were able to buy 2 pieces of land. One parcel was next to my family property along the Trask River, and so we started our family there so we could be close to my parents. My husband was often away working as a steam and stationary engineer on a boat that ran between Tillamook and Astoria. And as wife and mother, I stayed home and did the daily chores, cooking, cleaning, laundry, taking care of our children that would come eventually. And of course, any proper woman should know how to sew and crochet as well, so I made sure that I was more proficient than most. Now, Henry and I had 3 children. Our first child was Margaret, Zola Margaret, who later became a teacher just like her mother, and she moved to Portland. Then we had a very intelligent son named Lloyd, who I called by his middle name Prescott, which I think is much more sophisticated. And Prescott first worked on boats as a young boy, but later became a lubrication engineer with Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company. Our youngest son, Leslie, was born on April 1st, 1900, while we were living in Rainier, Oregon for a short time, and my husband was working at an engineering job on the Columbia River. However, my mother died in 1908, and so we wanted to come back towards Tillamook to be closer to my father. I urged him to move us to the lovely village of Forest Grove, where we bought 3 acres right in the middle of town. And of course, it was a wonderful, stable environment for our children. They went to the schools here, Pacific University. Our son Leslie even became Forest Grove High School's star football and basketball player, and the whole town loved him. My brother Willie married Philadelphia Bramwell in an elegant wedding. Their new home was with my parents on the Tillamook farm, and they had 3 daughters, Layla, Georgia, and Lavelle. And one day, while going out to cut wood, my brother Willie's double-bladed axe got caught in some trees. As he pulled to free it, of course, a twig flew out and pierced his remaining good eye, so that left him pretty much rendered blind at the age of 38. So our family hired a home teacher who came out to the farm and taught my brother how to walk with a cane and use his hands and how to read Braille. And so he was able to get along after that. But eventually he attended the Portland Blind Trade School, which opened up in 1921. And that taught him many more skills that he was able to get through with the rest of his life. My adoptive brother, Frank Beadle Owens, married a girl named Eva Nelson, and he got a job working at a nearby farm hauling cheese into Tillamook with a mule team. Eventually, him and his wife bought a dairy farm as well. Now, my father, in his later years, came from Tillamook to live with us in Forest Grove. We took care of him for some time, but eventually it became too difficult, and so we ended up having to send him to the Oregon State Hospital in Salem. He lived out his years there, and when he passed away, I brought his remains back here to the cemetery, and of course you can see him buried here next to my brother Willie and myself. Now, the family story goes that my daughter Zola, in her old age, wrote a letter to her great-nephew Bruce, talking about how her mother was in a book by Laura Ingalls Wilder. Well, of course, that was the young girl that stole my doll as a child and threw me in the pond to get covered by leeches. But those were stories from back when we were young, and it was a wonderful time in Walnut Grove, Minnesota. And I often think about my childhood and how I came to be all the way here in Forest Grove. I can surely say that I led a fine life and that my children grew into good people. And I'm thankful that I can rest here in peace with my wonderful father and my long-suffering brother, Will. Thank you.